All right, so today we're going deep with a storytelling master,
Oh, yeah.
Robert McKee and his audiobook story.
Nice.
And this isn't like, your typical how-to writing guide. This is
Right.
about like getting those core principles, that
Mhm.
makes stories just tick. And
Yeah.
not even just for writers, like anyone who wants to figure out the magic of narrative,
Oh, yeah, for
see
sure.
their own life, maybe in a new light even.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
McKee really pushes us beyond just those like surface level rules
Mm-hmm.
and digs into the why of storytelling.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shy away from like the big claim
Oh, yeah.
that story is a metaphor for life.
That's the line that got me.
Yeah.
He calls stories equipment for living,
Yeah.
which is like
Yeah.
dramatic,
A
but
little bit. Yeah.
kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Absolutely. Think of it this way.
Yeah.
Stories help us like recognize patterns,
Mm-hmm.
not just in the fictional worlds we enjoy,
Mm.
but in our own lives.
Right.
Like, that tricky boss and the unexpected plot twist in your career.
Mm-hmm.
These aren't just like random events.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
beats in your own like personal narrative.
So I should be taking notes on my life
Each-
with the same intensity I do when I watch a movie.
McKee would argue that those notes would probably reveal a lot about like,
Uh-huh.
your choices, your
Mhm.
reactions to
Yeah,
conflict,
right.
ultimately the story you're creating with your life.
Wow.
Yeah.
He also points out that the quality of storytelling seems to be, well, not what it used to be. Is he
No.
just like,
Being grumpy.
a grumpy old screenwriter?
Yeah, is there something to that?
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a point there.
Okay.
He argues that like, many writers rush to tell their own stories
Mm-hmm.
without truly understanding like the craft.
Right.
It's like trying to bake a cake without knowing what flour is.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah.
So passion isn't enough.
Right.
You need the tools to shape that.
Absolutely.
Raw material.
McKee also acknowledges that some like talented people write poorly,
Mm-hmm.
not because they lack skill, but because they're more focused on like
Yeah.
proving something or expressing themselves
Right.
than on actually connecting with the audience.
I've seen those movies,
Yeah.
read those books where it feels like they're just like,
Showing off.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no sense of like a shared experience.
Exactly.
Precisely. And that's where those two types of bad scripts come in.
Oh, yeah.
The personal story bad script
Okay.
and the guaranteed commercial success bad script.
Okay. Lay those on me. What are those?
So the personal story bad script mistakes everyday details for deep meaning.
Okay.
It's like someone telling you their dream
Right.
in excruciating detail.
Yeah. Been there.
Accurate maybe, but not exactly riveting.
Okay. Ouch.
Yeah. And then the guaranteed commercial success bad script
Mm-hmm.
is all spectacle explosions and plot twists
Yeah.
that don't add up to anything meaningful.
Right.
Think of it like a flashy action movie with like
Yeah.
board characters.
Okay. So one's like all personal and meandering.
Mm-hmm.
The other's all flash, no substance.
Two sides of the same bad storytelling coin.
Yeah.
Exactly. And McKee would argue that both fail
Okay.
because they lack respect for the audience.
Okay.
They're either self-indulgent
Right.
or manipulative,
Mm-hmm.
focused on the writer's ego or the box office,
Okay.
rather than on crafting a genuinely engaging experience.
So no ego trips, no empty spectacle.
Right,
But how do we actually build a good story?
right.
He uses the term story events.
Yeah.
What are those?
He defines a story event as a meaningful change in a character's life,
Okay.
expressed through values like love, death, freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as like a turning point,
Yeah.
a moment that shifts the trajectory of the story
Okay.
and forces the character to make choices.
He also talks about turning a scene. Is that related?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Turning a scene means shifting the value charge.
Okay.
Maybe a character starts confident and ends defeated,
Yeah.
or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
That shift is what creates dramatic tension
Yeah.
and keeps us on the edge of our seats.
So every scene should have like
Yeah.
a purpose, a mini arc
Yeah.
that contributes to the larger story.
Exactly. And McKee is ruthless about cutting scenes that don't turn,
Oh, wow.
that don't create meaningful change.
Okay.
Every beat has to count.
I'm starting to see the structure here.
Right.
But how do we go from like individual scenes to like a whole story?
McKee lays out like a hierarchy.
Yeah.
From beats to scenes to sequences to acts,
Yeah.
building to the entire story.
Okay.
He uses the example of a Midwest businesswoman
Oh, yeah.
trying to land a job in New York
I love underdog stories.
to illustrate how this works.
Right.
So picture this.
Mhm.
Scene one,
Yeah.
the woman's in her hotel room, nervous as heck,
Oh, yeah.
about a company party
Okay.
She finds the perfect outfit,
Right.
and her confidence soars. That's one scene turning on the value of self-belief.
Got it. Simple but effective.
Right.
What throws her off?
Scene 2,
Okay.
sudden thunderstorm.
Oh, no.
No cabs.
Oh, my God.
And she's forced to, like, run through Central Park at night.
What?
Right now, the value at stake is survival.
Oh, my gosh. The stakes are high.
Yeah, does she make it?
Yeah, does she?
She fights her way through the park,
Okay.
arrives at the party, disheveled but alive.
Oh, my gosh.
Scene 3, she turns her disastrous appearance
Okay.
into a funny story.
Oh, nice.
Wins over the executives and gets the job.
Oh, perfect.
Right, so 3 scenes.
Yeah.
3 different values turning,
Yeah.
all building to a sequence about her landing the job.
So that sequence would be part of, like,
Right.
a larger act,
Exactly.
which ultimately builds toward the complete story of her transformation.
For transformation, yes.
Now, McKee also introduces this story triangle,
The story triangle, yeah.
which maps out different approaches to storytelling.
Different approaches, right? He pinpoints 3 primary points on that triangle.
Okay.
Arc plot,
Okay.
mini plot,
Mm-hmm.
and anti-plot.
Okay.
And you've probably seen great examples of each without even realizing it.
All right. Break it down for me. What sets these forms apart?
Think of Chinatown.
Okay.
Classic arc plot,
Yeah.
single protagonist driving the action,
Mm.
clear cause and effect,
Yeah.
a resolution where everything comes together.
Okay. Got it.
Now imagine Paris, Texas.
Okay.
That's more of a mini plot,
Okay.
multiple protagonists,
Mm-hmm.
a more passive central character
Okay. An ending.
that leaves you pondering.
So one's very structured.
Yeah.
The other's more introspective and ambiguous.
Exactly. Then you have the anti-plot.
Yeah. Okay.
Think Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Okay.
Completely upending conventions.
Yeah.
Inconsistent realities,
Mm-hmm.
coincidences over causality,
Yeah.
pure chaos.
So the anti-plot is for those who like their narratives a little.
Unhinged.
Yeah.
Precisely. And above that line, dividing the mini plot and the anti-plot,
Mm-hmm.
are stories where life clearly changes for the characters,
Okay.
even if those changes are subtle.
Right.
Below that line is what McKee calls non-plot,
Oh, okay.
where there's no real transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like a slice of life film.
Yeah.
It can be interesting,
Yeah.
but lacks that satisfying arc.
Interesting. So even in those less conventional forms,
Yeah.
transformation seems to be key.
Transformation is key.
But if we're looking at the politics of story design,
Yeah.
which approach resonates most widely?
McKee argues that most people connect with the arc plot.
Okay.
It reflects how we see our own lives,
Mhm.
striving for goals, overcoming obstacles,
Right.
ultimately achieving those big irreversible changes.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right? We like our stories have a sense of closure,
Yeah.
even if our own lives are a bit messier.
A little bit. Yeah.
But he's not saying that those other forms are somehow less valuable.
Okay.
He acknowledges the artistry of the mini plot and the anti-plot,
Mm-hmm.
but argues that mastering the arc plot
Right.
is like learning the fundamentals
Yeah.
before experimenting with more abstract form.
Like build a solid foundation, then get wild with it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'm curious about how setting plays into all this.
Setting,
McKee calls it four-dimensional.
four-dimensional.
That sounds intense.
Yeah, he's talking about 2 dimensions of time,
Okay.
period, when the story takes place,
Mm-hmm.
and duration, how much time it covers,
Okay.
and 2 dimensions of space,
Got it.
location where it unfolds,
Mm-hmm.
and levels of conflict,
Okay.
internal, personal, societal, etc.
So setting is more than just like
Right.
a backdrop.
Yeah, it's a framework
Yeah.
that shapes the entire narrative.
And here's the thing. He actually sees limitation in setting as a good thing. Hold on. Didn't we just talk about that with genre?
He did.
Explain this to me. How can limitations be a good thing?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
By defining the specifics of your story's world, you force yourself to dig deeper,
Mm-hmm.
to be more original, to avoid those like generic tropes.
So instead of feeling stifled,
Right.
you're actually pushed to be more original.
Exactly. McKee uses War and Peace as like a prime example.
Yeah.
It's vast,
Mhm.
but focused on a limited number of characters.
Right.
That focus allows for like the emotional depth
Yeah.
that makes it so powerful.
So it's not about how big your world is,
Right.
but how deeply you explore it.
Exactly.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued by this idea of genre.
Genre.
How does that shape the storytelling process?
Genre provides a framework
Okay.
for both the writer and the audience.
Yeah.
Think about it. If you pick up a romance novel,
Mm-hmm.
You have certain expectations
Yeah.
about the plot, the characters, the emotional arc.
You're not expecting a zombie apocalypse to break out.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But McKee also stresses that, like, understanding genre isn't about being boxed in.
Right.
It's about knowing the rules so you can play with them, subvert them, maybe even break them in a way that makes your story even more compelling.
So it's about being aware of those expectations and then choosing how to play with them.
Precisely. McKee actually lists out a ton of genres.
Does he?
From love stories to westerns to crime thrillers.
Wow.
And he encourages writers to explore those they love. Find what sparks their passion.
Because at the end of the day, it's that passion, that genuine love for the story.
Yes.
That will resonate with the audience.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk about character.
Character.
McKee makes this interesting distinction between character and characterization.
Right.
What's the difference?
He sees characterization as all the surface stuff.
Okay.
Appearance, job, social status. The things we can observe.
Right.
True character, however, is revealed through choices under pressure.
Okay.
It's about who a person really is when the stakes are high.
So characterization is the costume and character is the soul.
Exactly.
Beneath it.
And McKee argues that creating compelling characters is about contrasting those two things.
Okay.
He uses the example of Rambo and James Bond to illustrate this.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
How do those iconic characters fit into this?
Think about Rambo. In the first film, he was a complex, troubled Vietnam vet.
Right.
But as the sequels rolled out,
Yeah.
he became more of a caricature.
Right.
All muscles and explosions.
Yeah.
Losing that depth.
So he became a victim of his own characterization.
Right. The surface overshadowing the substance.
Exactly.
Now look at James Bond.
Okay.
He's endured for decades.
Right.
Because he constantly subverts expectations. Suave on the surface, but ruthless and resourceful when needed. That contrast keeps him intriguing.
So it's about creating characters who are more than meets the eye.
Right.
Who have hidden depths that are revealed through their actions.
Exactly. What about the challenges they face?
Yeah.
How does McKee approach conflict?
Yeah.
He breaks it down into 3 levels.
Right.
Internal struggles within oneself.
Okay.
Personal conflicts in relationships. And extrapersonal clashes with institutions or the environment.
Got it.
And a good story can weave all of those together.
Right.
Creating a complex web for the characters to navigate.
This is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
McKee introduces this concept of the gap between expectation and result.
Yeah.
Those moments when our plans go completely haywire.
He argues that those gaps are where the drama lies.
Okay.
It's when a character takes an action expecting one outcome, but the world throws them a curveball.
Right.
We see their true character emerge.
It's like life.
It is like life.
We rarely get what we expect.
Exactly. And he uses that brilliant scene from Chinatown.
Oh, yeah.
Where Jake Gitz goes to confront Evelyn Mulwray.
Yeah.
Expecting a clear-cut arrest.
Right.
But his feelings complicate everything.
It's such a good movie.
It's a masterclass in creating tension.
Yeah.
Through that gap.
So conflict is about more than just like external plot twists.
Right.
It's about those internal struggles.
Yeah.
And the choices characters make when facing the unexpected.
Absolutely. But how do we connect those moments back to the bigger picture of the story's meaning?
Yeah.
That's where McKee's concepts of premise and controlling idea come in.
Okay. What are those?
Premise is the initial spark.
Okay.
That what-if question that gets the story rolling.
Right.
The controlling idea, however, is the story's ultimate meaning.
Got it.
The message it conveys, revealed through the climax.
So premise is the starting point.
Yeah.
And the controlling idea is where the journey leads us.
Exactly. He also argues that the writer shouldn't force a meaning onto the story.
Right.
It should emerge organically.
It should feel natural, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to McKee's belief in the writer's social responsibility.
Okay, I'm listening. This sounds important.
He argues that every story, whether we intend it or not, carries a message, an idea, a way of looking at the world.
Okay, so what kind of responsibility does he think storytellers have?
He doesn't advocate for preaching or moralizing.
Okay.
It's about honesty in storytelling.
Yeah.
It's about exploring the complexities of life, the good and the bad,
right,
with integrity and a commitment to, like, truth-telling.
Okay.
Because stories have the power to shape beliefs,
Right.
to influence perceptions, to make us question what we thought we knew.
So it's about wielding that power responsibly,
Right.
not just entertaining, but maybe challenging our thinking.
Yes.
Pushing us to see the world in a new way.
Exactly. And those are the stories that stick with us.
Yeah.
The ones that spark conversations, that make us question.
Right.
That leave us with more questions than answers.
And that is the magic of storytelling.
The magic of storytelling. And speaking of those thought-provoking stories, McKee also digs deeper into the idea that structure is character and character is structure. It's a bit of a mind-bender, but it highlights how intertwined those two elements really are.
Okay, unpack that for me. How can structure be character and vice versa?
Think about it this way. A character's true nature is revealed through the choices they make under pressure, right?
Right.
And those choices, those actions, are what drive the plot forward, creating the structure of the story.
So it's a kind of feedback loop.
Yeah.
Character shapes plot, and plot in turn reveals character.
Exactly. McKee uses Hamlet as an example.
Okay.
Hamlet's characterization, that melancholy prince we all know, is just the starting point.
Okay.
Is his choices driven by his deeper character, his intelligence, his moral struggles, his thirst for revenge that create the tragic chain of events.
And as he makes those choices, as he grapples with those internal conflicts, his character's transformed. He goes from hesitant to decisive.
Right.
But those decisions ultimately lead to his downfall, tragic but brilliant.
Right. And that transformation, that arc of character development is what gives the play its structure. Each scene, each act builds upon the last, pushing Hamlet further down that path.
So it's not about coming up with a plot and then plugging characters into it.
Right.
The two are inseparable, organically intertwined. That's making me rethink how I analyze stories.
Yeah. And speaking of frameworks, let's talk about genre.
Okay, we touched on this earlier, but I'm ready to go deeper.
Okay.
How does knowing the rules of a genre actually help us tell better stories?
Think about it when you watch a horror film. You go in with certain expectations.
Right.
You're primed for suspense, jump scares, that creeping sense of dread.
Yeah.
Those genre conventions create a shared language between the storyteller and the audience.
So we know what we're getting into, but doesn't that make things predictable?
Right.
Where's the room for originality?
That's where things get interesting. McKee argues that understanding genre isn't about being restricted.
Okay.
It's about knowing the rules so well that you can play with them.
Right.
Subvert them, maybe even break them in a way that creates a whole new level of engagement.
So it's like jazz. You have to master the scales before you can improvise.
Right. What's a good example of a film that plays with genre conventions in a surprising way?
Yeah. What is a good example?
He uses Chinatown again.
Okay.
Which on the surface seems like a classic film noir detective story.
Right.
But it breaks one of the cardinal rules of the genre.
Okay. Refresh my memory. What's the rule?
In traditional film noir, the detective usually solves the case.
Okay.
Justice prevails, order is restored.
Right.
But in Chinatown, the bad guy wins.
Oh, wow.
The detective and the audience are left with a sense of disillusionment and despair.
Wow. That's bleak.
It is, but it makes it a much more powerful and memorable film.
Yeah, because it defies our expectations.
Exactly. And McKee emphasizes that writers should also consider the historical and cultural context of genre.
Okay.
A Western made in the 1950s will have a different flavor than one made today, reflecting the evolving social landscape.
So genre is a living thing constantly evolving. It's not just about following a formula, but about understanding how those formulas have changed over time.
Right.
And how we can use them to create something fresh and relevant.
Got it. Now, let's shift gears and talk about setting.
Okay.
Remember McKee's claim that it's four-dimensional.
Yeah. Break it for me again. How does setting go beyond just a backdrop?
He's referring to two dimensions of time.
Okay.
Period. When the story takes place, and duration, how much time it covers.
Right.
Then there are the two dimensions of space, location, the specific geography.
Okay.
And levels of conflict, internal, personal, societal, etc.
So setting creates a framework for the entire story. It's not just about where and when, but also about the scope of the conflicts.
And here's where McKee's contrarian thinking comes in again. He actually sees limitation in setting as a catalyst for creativity.
Well, didn't we talk about that with genre?
We did. It comes up a lot.
Okay, explain this to me. How can limitations be a good thing?
Think of it this way, by clearly defining the world of your story. You're forced to work within those constraints.
Okay.
You have to be more inventive, to explore the nuances of that specific setting,
Right.
to avoid falling into generic tropes.
So instead of feeling stifled, you're actually pushed to be more original.
Exactly. McKee uses War and Peace as a prime example.
Okay.
It's a sweeping epic, but it's ultimately grounded
Yeah.
in the experiences of a limited group of characters.
Right.
That focus allows for incredible depth and emotional resonance.
So it's not about how big your world is,
Right.
but how deeply you explore it. Less is more.
Precisely. Now let's dive into one of McKee's most thought-provoking arguments,
Okay.
that character trumps characterization.
We touched on this before, but I'm ready to dig deeper.
Okay.
What does he mean by that?
He's making a distinction between those superficial traits we observe in a character, their appearance, job, social status, and their true nature, which is revealed through their actions,
Okay.
their choices under pressure.
So characterization is the outward persona, and character is the soul beneath it.
You got it. Characterization is what we see on the surface. True character is dynamic.
Right.
It's revealed through those moments of decision, those crossroads where a person's true nature emerges.
He uses the examples of Rambo and James Bond to illustrate this point.
Yes, he does.
Remind me how those characters fit into this idea.
Think about Rambo in the first film. He was a complex, troubled Vietnam vet. But as the sequels went on,
Yeah.
he became a caricature, all muscles and explosions.
Right.
His characterization overshadowed his true character.
He became a victim of his own image.
Exactly. Now look at James Bond. He's endured for decades.
Right.
Because he's more than just a suave secret agent.
Right.
He's charming,
Yeah.
yes, but also ruthlessly resourceful when needed.
Yeah.
That contrast, that depth, is what keeps him compelling.
So it's about creating characters who are more than meets the eye, who have those hidden layers that are revealed through their choices and actions.
Exactly. What about the challenges they face?
Right.
How does McKee approach conflict in storytelling?
Oh, okay.
He breaks it down into 3 levels.
Okay.
Internal struggles within oneself, personal conflicts in relationships,
Right.
and extrapersonal clashes with institutions, the environment, etc.
Okay.
And a well-crafted story can weave all those levels together.
This is where McKee's concept of the gap between expectation and result really comes into play, right?
Yeah.
Those moments when life throws us a curveball and our carefully laid plans go out the window.
He argues that those gaps are where the real drama unfolds. When a character takes an action expecting one outcome,
Right.
but the world reacts in a totally unexpected way, we see their true nature emerge.
It's about how they adapt, how they make choices in the face of the unexpected.
Precisely. And McKee argues that every story needs those moments of risk.
Right.
Those situations where the protagonist has something to lose.
Yeah.
The higher the stakes, the more gripping the drama.
No risk,
Yeah.
no reward. But how do we connect those moments of conflict and choice back to the overall meaning of the story?
That's where McKee's ideas about premise and the controlling idea come in.
Okay.
Remember, premise is that initial spark, the what if, that gets the ball rolling.
Right.
The controlling idea is the deeper meaning, the message the story conveys,
Okay.
which is revealed through the climax.
So premise is the starting point and the controlling idea is the destination.
Exactly. And McKee stresses that this deeper meaning shouldn't be something the writer forces onto the story.
Right. It shouldn't feel forced.
It should emerge organically from the characters, their choices, and the consequences of those choices.
That makes sense. A forced message feels preachy.
Right.
It's much more powerful when the meaning resonates naturally from the events of the story.
Absolutely. And that brings us to McKee's thoughts on the writer's social responsibility.
Okay.
He argues that every story, whether intentionally or not, conveys a message, a way of looking at the world.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What does he mean by social responsibility when it comes to storytelling?
He's not talking about preaching or pushing an agenda.
Yeah.
It's about honesty, integrity, and a commitment to truth-telling.
Mm-hmm.
He believes that writers have a responsibility to be mindful of the power of stories,
Right.
to use that power wisely, and to reflect their own genuine beliefs and insights.
So it's about approaching storytelling with a sense of ethics.
Yeah.
With an understanding that our words have the power to shape perceptions and influence beliefs.
Exactly. And McKee argues that the most impactful stories are those that challenge us, that make us question, that leave us with more questions than answers.
Because those are the stories that spark conversations, that make us think critically, that stay with us long after we've finished reading or watching.
Yes.
They have the power to change the way we see the world.
Now, to really understand how this substance of story works.
Okay.
McKee encourages us to shift our perspective and look at stories from the inside out,
Okay.
through the eyes of the characters.
We touched on this briefly, but I'm ready for a deeper dive. Why is this shift in perspective so important?
McKee argues that it's crucial for creating those authentic human reactions
Okay.
that draw us into a story.
Yeah.
It's not enough to simply describe what a character is doing or saying.
Right.
We need to understand what's going on inside their heads, to feel their emotions, to experience the world through their senses.
It's about empathy, right? Stepping into someone else's shoes and seeing the world through their eyes.
Exactly. And he uses that brilliant scene from Chinatown
Oh, yeah.
where Jake Geets goes to confront Evelyn Mulray as a masterclass in writing from the inside out.
Okay.
We're right there with him as he drives to her house,
Yeah.
as he approaches the door, as his carefully rehearsed plan starts to unravel.
We feel his frustration, his confusion, his conflicting emotions.
Yeah.
It's like we're experiencing the scene ourselves.
That's the power of this technique.
Yeah.
It creates a sense of intimacy and immediacy
Right.
that draws us into the story.
So it's not just about the external events, but about how the character experiences those events, both internally and externally.
Precisely. And McKee offers a simple but effective exercise for writers who want to develop this skill.
Okay, I like exercises.
He suggests imagining yourself as the character in a specific scene
Okay.
and asking, if I were this character in this moment, what would I do?
Yeah.
What would I feel? What would I think?
It's about inhabiting the character, fully letting their perspective guide your writing.
Exactly. And by doing so,
Yeah.
you can tap into that wellspring of authenticity and create characters who feel real relatable and ultimately unforgettable.
Now, McKee also dives deep into the interplay between a character's conscious and unconscious desires.
Yes.
How does that factor into creating compelling characters?
This is where things get really fascinating.
Okay.
It's often in that space between what a character believes they want
Okay.
and what they truly desire, even if they're unaware of it,
Right.
that the most compelling drama unfold.
So it's about creating characters who are driven by forces they don't fully understand.
right.
Who are grappling with internal contradictions that they may not even be aware of.
Exactly. And McKee argues that this interplay between conscious and unconscious desires
Yeah.
adds layers of mystery, intrigue, and depth to a character.
Okay.
It allows for those unexpected twists and turns,
Right.
those surprising revelations that keep us hooked.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing those hidden complexities.
Precisely. And McKee believes that the most memorable characters are those who surprise us,
Yeah.
who defy our expectations, who make choices that seem to contradict their outward personas,
Right.
and who ultimately reveal themselves to be far more complex than we initially imagined.
So it's not about creating simple, predictable characters.
No.
It's about creating characters who are full of contradictions.
Right.
Who are driven by both internal and external forces.
Yes.
And who ultimately defy easy categorization.
Exactly. And McKee argues that this complexity is what makes characters feel real, relatable, and ultimately unforgettable.
Right.
They mirror the complexities we see in ourselves
Yeah.
and in the people around us.
Because let's face it, we're all a bit of a mystery, even to ourselves.
Precisely. And it's in those moments when a character acts in a way that surprises us, that contradicts our expectations,
Yeah.
that we get a glimpse into the depths of their being,
Right.
those hidden forces that shape their choices.
Those are the moments that really stick with us.
Yes.
Now, McKee also talks about the importance of a protagonist's capacity.
Yeah.
Their ability to take action and make choices that actually affect the course of the story.
He argues that a protagonist needs both the will and the capacity to pursue their desires,
Okay.
to overcome obstacles, and to ultimately create meaningful change.
Right.
Without capacity, a character becomes passive reactive and ultimately uninteresting.
So it's not enough to just want something a character has to have the ability to act on those desires.
Yes.
To make choices that have consequences and to actually drive the story forward.
Exactly. And McKee emphasizes that capacity can take many forms.
Okay.
It might be physical strength, intelligence, social influence, or any other quality that allows a character to make things happen in their world.
And a protagonist's capacity often evolves throughout the story, right?
It does.
They face challenges, they learn from their experiences,
Right.
and they become more capable as a result.
Precisely. And McKee argues that the audience needs to believe in that capacity,
Okay.
to feel that the protagonist has what it takes to achieve their goals,
Yeah.
even when the odds are stacked against them.
So it's about creating characters who are both believable and inspiring,
Yeah,
who demonstrate the human potential for growth, resilience, and triumph.
exactly. And this brings us to another key aspect of character development, empathy.
Okay.
McKee argues that for a story to truly resonate, the audience needs to connect with the protagonist on an emotional level.
We touched on this before, but I'm ready to delve deeper.
Right.
How does McKee distinguish between sympathy and empathy?
Sympathy is feeling sorry for a character, pitying their misfortunes.
Okay.
Empathy, however, is about truly understanding a character, about connecting with their experiences on a visceral level, about seeing the world through their eyes.
So it's not just about feeling bad for someone, it's about relating to them, understanding their struggles and triumphs, and seeing ourselves reflected in their journey.
You got it. And McKee argues that empathy is crucial for creating characters who feel real, who resonate with the audience, and who ultimately stay with us long after the story is over.
Because when we empathize with a character, when we truly connect with their journey, it becomes our journey too.
Yeah.
We learn from their experiences, we grow alongside them, and we emerge from the story changed.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And McKee emphasizes that creating empathy doesn't require a protagonist to be likable or even morally upright.
Okay.
We can empathize with characters who make mistakes, who act selfishly, who even commit terrible deeds, as long as we understand the motivations behind their actions.
That's a powerful idea. So it's not about creating flawless heroes or one-dimensional villains,
Right.
but about creating complex, multifaceted human beings capable of both great and terrible things.
Exactly. And McKee argues that this complexity is essential for creating characters who feel real, relatable, and ultimately unforgettable.
He uses the example of Macbeth to illustrate this point.
He does.
Macbeth is, objectively speaking, a villain. He commits murder, betrays his friends, and plunges his country into chaos.
Yeah.
And yet Shakespeare manages to make him a deeply empathetic character. How does he pull that off?
By giving Macbeth a conscience, by allowing us to see his inner struggles, his doubts, his guilt, and his agonizing awareness of the darkness he's embracing.
Okay.
We understand his ambition, his lust for power, and even his susceptibility to manipulation.
So we see the human being beneath the monstrous deeds, and that makes all the difference.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even the most flawed characters have their reasons, their motivations, their internal logic.
And that's what makes them compelling, right?
Yep.
Because they reflect the complexities and contradictions we see in ourselves and in the world around us, we're all capable of both darkness and light.
Precisely. Now, to bring things full circle,
Yeah.
let's revisit McKee's intriguing analogy that story is metaphor. What do you think he means by that?
It's like he's saying that stories at their core are reflections of life itself.
Yeah.
They offer insights into the human condition, and they help us understand ourselves and the world around us in a deeper, more meaningful way.
You nailed it. A good story isn't just entertainment. It's a way of illuminating those deeper truths,
Right.
of offering a fresh perspective on the world,
Yeah.
and of exploring those big questions that shape our lives.
And he argues that every story, whether it's a sprawling epic or a quiet, intimate character study,
Right.
contains a metaphor, a symbolic representation of a larger truth or idea. It's like a hidden code waiting to be deciphered.
Exactly. And it's up to the audience to decode that metaphor,
Yeah.
to connect the dots between the events of the story and their own experiences,
Right.
to find the meaning that resonates with them personally.
So it's not about spoon-feeding the audience a message.
Yeah.
It's about sparking their imaginations and trusting them to draw their own conclusions.
Precisely. And McKee believes that this open-ended approach to storytelling is what makes stories so enduring and so powerful. They become mirrors reflecting our own experiences, our own beliefs, and our own understanding of the world.
Okay, that's making me rethink how I approach the stories I consume.
Yeah.
It's not just about being entertained, it's about engaging with the material on a deeper level, looking for those metaphors and finding my own personal connection to the story.
Exactly. And that's what McKee ultimately encourages us to do, to become more conscious, more discerning, and more appreciative consumers and creators of stories.
Because stories are everywhere, right? They shape our lives, they inform our beliefs,
They do.
they connect us to each other, and they help us make sense of the world.
Precisely. And by understanding the principles that make stories work, we can not only enjoy them more fully, but also use them to create more meaningful and impactful narratives of our own.
So whether you're an aspiring writer, a voracious reader, or simply a lover of stories,
Yes.
McKee's story offers a wealth of knowledge and inspiration.
It does.
I highly recommend diving into it yourself and exploring the depths of his wisdom.
I agree.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into Robert McKee's story, I'm curious about how all of this applies to our own lives.
Yeah.
We've been talking about stories as metaphors,
Right.
but how can we actually use those metaphors
Yeah.
to understand our own experiences?
McKee would say that we're all protagonists
Okay.
in our own personal narratives. We
Yeah.
have desires, we face obstacles, we make choices
Yeah.
that shape the course of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And just like in a well-crafted story, those choices have consequences.
Right.
They create those gaps between expectation and result
Yeah.
that push us to adapt, to grow, and ultimately become different versions of ourselves.
So instead of just reacting to life's curveballs,
Right.
we can start to see those challenges as opportunities for transformation.
Exactly. Think about a time when something didn't go according to plan.
Okay.
Maybe you didn't get that promotion you were hoping for.
Yeah.
Or a relationship ended unexpectedly.
Right.
Looking back, how did that experience challenge you? What did you learn about yourself?
Yeah.
How did it shape the next chapter of your story?
That's making me rethink some of my past failures.
Yeah.
As maybe not failures at all,
Right.
but rather turning points that led me to where I am now.
Right. And McKee would argue that those turning points,
Yeah.
those moments of conflict and choice,
Right.
are what give our lives meaning and purpose.
Okay.
They're the raw material
Mm-hmm.
from which our personal narratives are woven.
You mentioned that we all have desires that drive our actions.
Yes.
McKee also talks about the importance of understanding
Yeah.
both our conscious and unconscious desires.
Right.
How does that play out in our own lives?
It's about recognizing that we're not always aware
Mm-hmm.
of the forces that motivate us.
Okay.
We might think we want one thing,
Right.
but our actions reveal a deeper, perhaps hidden desire.
Yeah.
And it's in that space
Okay.
between what we think we want
Mm-hmm.
and what we truly desire
Right.
that we often find our greatest challenges
Yeah.
and our most profound growth.
So it's about becoming more self-aware.
Right?
About paying attention to our choices and asking ourselves why we're making them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And sometimes the answers might surprise us.
Yeah, I bet.
We might discover motivations that we've been suppressing,
Right.
fears that we've been avoiding, or dreams that we've buried deep inside.
Okay, I'm definitely going to need some time to process all of this. It's
Yeah.
like you're giving me a whole new lens to view my own life through.
And that's the power of McKee's work.
Yeah.
It's not just about writing better stories.
Right.
It's about understanding the human experience,
Yeah.
about recognizing the patterns and principles that shape our lives,
Hmm.
and about using that knowledge to become more conscious,
Yeah.
more intentional creators of our own personal narratives.
This has been an incredible deep dive
It has.
into the world of storytelling, according to Robert McKee.
Yes.
We've explored the fundamental principles of narrative structure,
Right.
the nuances of character development, the power of genre and setting, and the writer's social responsibility.
We've also connected those ideas to our own lives, exploring how we can use these principles to understand our own experiences and even shape our personal narratives.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to take a closer look at the stories I consume
Yeah.
and to be more mindful of the story I'm creating with my own life.
And that's what McKee ultimately encourages us to do,
Yeah.
to become more conscious, more discerning, and more appreciative consumers and creators of stories.
Because stories are more than just entertainment.
Right.
They're reflections of who we are, what we believe, and what we aspire to become.
Beautifully said. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I encourage you to keep exploring the power of stories. Pay attention to the narrative that shape your world. Analyze the structure, connect with the characters,
Right.
and most importantly, never stop telling your own story.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
All right.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep telling your stories.